Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am Xavier Smith, and today I'm going to talk about modern classification. So, let's start with some background. First of all, a vocab term, evolution. Evolution is the historical development of a group of organisms, so they develop new traits over time. This is also called natural selection. So, a species is not easy to define. There's no one way to define a species, so there's multiple different ways that people define species. Species defined by one system may be different than species in another system. Like biological species, their thought is that, well, if an organism and another organism can interbreed and produce a fertile offspring, then they must be of the same species. But then the typological species concept says that species are unchanging, distinct, and of natural types, and species are defined based on physical characteristics. So if you just look at an organism, you're like, okay, that is a monarch butterfly. You can just tell right away. And any butterfly that looks a little different than that is a different species because it has to look exactly the same. They're unchanging and of natural types. So there could be differences in species, who classifies what as a species there. Then Aristotle and Linnaeus thought that organisms are arranged into species based on physical similarities. This is called typological. This is their typological species concept, which I've read aloud as species are unchanging, distinct, and of natural types, and then species can be identified based on their appearance. So if you see a butterfly that looks, I don't know, if you define this one butterfly as a monarch butterfly, if you see anything that looks different, it's got an extra couple, it's got a different wing pattern, it's got something, it's a different species. So there's problems with the typological species concept. Then, the biological species concept is a group of organisms are able to interbreed and produce fertile offspring. So if these organisms, they can breed and then there are fertile offspring, they must be of the same species, correct? But like wolves and dogs, they're different species. They've had enough time to evolve to different species, but they can still interbreed occasionally. Then there's different species of plants that can interbreed. They can just interbreed, cross-pollinate. But the biological species concept works in many everyday occurrences, so it's still used. Then the phylogenetic species concept. First, vocab term. Phylogeny is the evolutionary history of a species. So, it is defined as like a group of organisms is distinct from another group of organisms, and they have a pattern of common ancestry and descent. So if we think of like a tree of life, here's like a common ancestor, right? And you could think like two branches going off. Well, there's this gradual evolution, right? So if they're going different ways, we get all these things called like nodes, which are points where there's like divergence from the evolutionary track. But this is common ancestor, all right? Ancestor. So this is our common ancestor. And then these, whatever groups, whatever organisms they are, they split off, they diverge onto two different evolutionary tracks. And this organism at the end here is different than this organism at the end here. And they're saying, well, then this organism and the ones close to it on its track should be classified as like species. Well, anything that's really like here on the evolutionary track is part of the species. So, I hope that made sense, because now we are going to compare them all. So if it didn't, you get an overview. Okay, So we have our species concept, our description, our limitation, and our benefit. Let's start with typological. Well, the description is its comparison of physical differences. Well, comparison of physical characteristics. So if you look at an organism, you should be able to tell what species it is. That's what this is saying. The limitation, alleles produce a wide variety of phenotypes within a species. So, like feather color could be different, wing pattern could be different. There are a wide variety of things that could look different physically, but they're still the same species. So, benefit, there are left detailed records of a species' physical characteristics. Because to define a species, they used to just, Aristotle and Linnaeus would they'd look at the species, and then people following their classification system would take detailed notes on the physical characteristics. Then biological, the description is there are similar characteristics and their ability to produce fertile offspring. So they need to have similar characteristics, and then if they interbreed, they should produce fertile offspring. The limitation, some organisms of different species occasionally interbreed, and it does not account for extinct species. So we cannot classify extinct species if we don't know how they bred. Then the benefit, it applies in most cases, so it is still commonly used. Our phylogenetic is the description, it's based on evolutionary history. Remember that evolutionary track, everything on the same evolutionary track as it, or in the same place, is like the same species. And then the limitation, not all evolutionary histories are known. That would take a long time, and we may never know all evolutionary histories. So phylogenetic is good, but we don't know all the histories, and it's all inferred anyways. And then benefit, it accounts for extinct species, and it considers molecular data like DNA, the nucleotides, RNA, amino acids. It accounts for all of that. If they're similar between two species over time, then they're classified together. That's supposed to say characters. Characters are inherited features that vary among species. So, let's keep talking. Shared morphological, which again are the structure and form of an organism or one of its parts. So, the structure and form of an organism, characters, suggest species are closely related and have a common ancestor, like birds and dinosaurs. You might not think they look too similar, but there's been evidence to show that dinosaurs have once had feathers, well, some of them, and birds have feathers. Then dinosaurs, some of them have hollow bones, birds have hollow bones. So there's a lot of similarities between birds and dinosaurs, and those are all morphological. They're all anatomical. They're in the body. And then there's biochemical characters, which are like amino acids and nucleotides, so DNA, help determine evolutionary relationships. Because if you look at one chromosome, look at another, if they're pretty similar, they're probably pretty related. Like here, we have a species 1 and a species 2. I see there's some clear differences. Don't mind the chromosome size, they were supposed to be the same. But I see there are clear differences, but there are many things that line up. So I'm guessing they're quite closely related. That's just an inference. But that's what you would do with biochemical characters. You'd compare DNA and amino acid sequences and say, well, if these are 98% the same, then they're probably on a very close evolutionary track. So, our molecular clock, this goes along with characters, is a model used to estimate time it has taken a species to evolve from a common ancestor. So, this is biochemical characters. Here's our ancestral gene, right? All black little strips. Then it splits off into two, and now both of these have two mutations. This one got two green, this one got two blue. Then this gets more mutation and turns into species 1. But this blue one splits off again. It diverges into 2 different species that both get different mutations. This could happen from like reproductive isolation. I don't know, if this species, they got split in half, and then I don't know, this group carried more of the recessive and this group carried the dominant, and then it kept going and shoom, new species, because soon they can't interbreed or something like that if you're going by biological species classification. So what we're saying here, why it's called the clock, is the more mutations means the more time that has passed. So here in the middle, there's not that much time has passed. It's enough time to get some mutations, but by the end here, when we have 4 mutations, 4 mutations, and 4 mutations, well, clearly there's been some time passed if we've already gotten to a new species. So scientists try to estimate how long it takes for one of these mutations to occur, but they can't really estimate it because mutations are influenced by a ton of things and they are not going at a constant rate. Cladistics is our next topic. So, cladistics classifies organisms in the order they diverge from a common ancestor. So, there are 2 characters we are going to be looking at, ancestral and derived. Ancestral characters are found within the entire line of descent of a group of organisms. So, like right from the very common ancestor that has the characteristics. Then derived characters, they're found only after a split from the descendant line. So here we have like ancestral characteristics. Then there's the mosses, but then look, there's vascular tissue that's derived, and the ferns get that. But then after the ferns leave, there's seeds that are derived. And then the conifers get that, and then flowers are derived, and then lilies get that. So now a cladogram is what this diagram is called. It's a branching diagram that represents a proposed evolutionary history of a species or group. And one of these branches is called a clade. So at the bottom here, we have our ancestor, and we are just saying an ancestor with chloroplasts. Usually this common ancestor is not known as a species. It's just inferred that it's there. So we have an ancestor with chloroplasts, and that chloroplast is an ancestral characteristic. Then anchors or roots are added, which are ancestral. And then you have mosses, which are an outgroup. So there are these groups we are looking at, groups of interest, as some may say, and we're comparing to the outgroup. This outgroup, well, your outgroup is supposed to have many ancestral characteristics and not many derived ones. So you can easily put these organisms that you are classifying in order of derived characteristics. So mosses don't have the derived characteristics. They got an ancestral characteristics of anchors or roots. And then vascular tissue, well, that's pretty basic. So that comes first, then seeds, then flowers. And then you say, well, ferns don't have seeds or flowers, so they're put right after vascular tissue. And conifers don't have flowers, so they're put right after seeds. And lilies have all of it. So it goes mosses, then vascular tissues added, then ferns, then seeds are added, then conifers, then flowers are added, and then lilies are at the end. And what I want you to get from this is these organisms that are closest together, like these 2 are close together, meaning they're most closely related. Like this ancestor with chloroplasts and the lilies, they're not that related. I mean, they're related, but not as related as the conifers and the lilies. They're much more closely related because they share many more of the derived characteristics. The one thing that varies is that lilies have flowers and conifers do not. Now, our final whiteboard is about the tree of life. Okay, the tree of life. Doesn't really look like a tree because it looks more like a cladogram, but that's what the tree of life is. It's cladistics. So we have our common ancestor here at the bottom, and then this is just the main branches. First, you have bacteria. If you remember from our 3 domains and 6 kingdoms of life video, bacteria are their own domain and they're in the kingdom bacteria. Then there's archaea, which are in the domain archaea and kingdom archaea. But then there's eukarya, which have kingdom animalia, animals, plantae, plants, fungi, fungus, and protista, protists. So from our common ancestor, this is, I guess, the root of the tree. And these could be the stumps, right? I don't know. Probably the main branches, I would say, because in bacteria, there's the kingdoms, whatever. But then there's like the phylum, right? These are more branches. These are smaller branches. And then from there, we have the classes, and then the orders on fast, families, right? And they slowly get smaller, then genus, then species. And like a species would be like an individual little leaf. So this is what we do. We start at common ancestor, and then we have our domains, the huge branches, then our kingdoms, still very big branches, then our classes, then our phylums, which are still pretty big, our orders, they're getting smaller. Oh, shoot, our classes come before our orders. Our classes, little smaller, then our orders, even smaller. Then our families, pretty small. Then our genus, our genera, are even smaller. And then our species is just a tiny little leaf on our tree of life. I hope this video helped on modern classification, and thank you for watching.